Hello and welcome to House Read, my Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire theorising channel. Usually I take a look at Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire from the perspective of a writer, using the techniques and craft of writing to make predictions about what may happen in the future and gain a deeper understanding of what's happening right now. In this episode, however, it's kind of a House Read special, where I'm going to look at my favourite house in Game of Thrones and lay a bit of information on you and a bit of speculation surrounding the house. House Read is one of the most mysterious houses in Game of Thrones, and in a way there's little information about it out there. But in this video I will take a look at what little information there is and see if any of it can be expanded upon. So first of all, I think it would be a good idea to take a look at Mira Reed's description of House Read in one of the DVD extras.
Mudmen, bog devils. Those are just the most pleasant names our fellow northerners have for us, the cranog men who live in the swamps of the neck. Because we do not live in castles like them. Because we do not farm like them. Because we are not tall or rich like them.
So, one of the pieces of information that Mira revealed in that short clip is that the people of the Neck, of which House Read is part of the culture of, do not farm. In a sense, they're hunter-gatherer type people. So, I think it'd be a good idea to take a look at an example of another hunter-gatherer group of people to see if we can use that to try and understand anything about the nature of what being a hunter-gatherer people might mean for my favourite house. The following audio is taken from a BBC documentary on a hunter-gatherer tribe.
They forage for crabs, a real delicacy, and smoke armadillos from their burrows.
Guess a nyo is a snake.
The men are master craftsmen. Jean-Claude Mombe shows me how they trap small game. Wire is now used instead of rattan.
You can see it's ingenious, deadly and horrible, but ingenious nonetheless. What we have is the snare's under tension and it's caught on a little stick, and these slats here are fixed this side but loose the far end. So as that goes down, you see it suddenly slips out, then that enables the snare to come free and it will capture the animal. And the reason it comes in tension like that is so that the animal hasn't got anywhere to grapple with the ground, so it can't bite itself free. It's just been held there, and it's pretty nasty, slow death by suffocation.
I'm enjoying my stay here immensely. Life is obviously tough, but the forest seems to provide almost everything that the village needs. And the people of Makoko undoubtedly have something that we have lost in our society: time for each other. Traditional hunter-gatherer people often have to work just 3 to 4 hours a day to satisfy their basic needs. The rest of the time is spent just hanging out. They play with their children, groom each other, tell stories, smoke and sleep.
So that's very interesting if you apply the same ideas to House Read. It means the culture of the cranog men is not revolved around agriculture and therefore not revolving around toil. It's in fact revolving around leisure.
But through our veins flows the same blood of the first men. And, at times, maybe something more.
This suggestion that House Read has something unusual in their genetic ancestry is something I'll come back to later.
We still live much as they did, on floating islands in houses of thatch and woven reeds. We fish, hunt, and tell our children of our heroes. The knight of the laughing tree who fought in the year of the false spring. The last marsh king who challenged the Starks and lost his crown and his daughter. And other stories, older still, since lost to the world.
This part about House Read telling each other stories which are unknown to the rest of Westeros feeds into the idea that essentially House Read is the house which is exemplified by the knowledge of secrets.
The Neck was not always a swamp. In the Dawn Age it was as dry and fertile as the rest of the north. But during the war with the First Men, the children of the forest brought down the hammer of waters on the Neck, trying to break Westeros in two. When the waters finally receded, they left the bogs and swamps we know today. Many of the first men decided to fight on, but my ancestors wisely chose to heed the children's power and advance no farther. They beat their swords into frog spears and fish hooks, and settled a land forever devastated by the folly of war. Unlike the rest of Westeros, we keep no garrisons and raise no soldiers for petty spats with our neighbours. Our land protects its own. An outsider will find in the neck an endless morass of suckholes, quicksands, and green grass that looks solid to the unwary eye, but turns to water the instant you tread on it. If you're lucky enough to be armoured, you'll only drown inside your own steel. If you're not, you get to meet what swims in that water. Serpents and monstrous lizard lions with teeth like daggers and never enough to eat. Don't worry. Only your horse will live long enough to feel their poisons burning through it. If you somehow survive all this, you may find that a well-placed dart can be as deadly as any blade. Not that you'll see us blowing it your way.
The environment the House Reed finds itself in has a profound effect on its culture, and one of those is the way that they approach warfare. In contrast to the rest of the cultures in Westeros, they have a profoundly more Chinese outlook in the way that violence can or can't solve problems. This sort of attitude to warfare is best explained, I think, by the ancient Chinese war manual, The Art of War, by Sun Tzu. The following audio clip is some quotes from that book, which I think best reveals House Reed's perspective on this particular aspect of life.
The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Let your plans be dark and impenetrable as night, and when you move, fall like a thunderbolt. All warfare is based on deception. Hence, when we are able to attack, we must seem unable. When using our forces, we must appear inactive. When we are near, we must make the enemy believe we are far away. When far away, we must make him believe we are near. He who is prudent and lies in wait for an enemy who is not, will be victorious.
So let's get back into Mira's descriptions.
Since the fall of the last Marsh King, House Reed has ruled the Neck beneath the banner of a black lizard lion on a grey-green field. We are not wealthy, powerful, or known even to our own countrymen. Our home, Greywater Watch, is no castle you've ever seen. And seeing it once does not mean you'll ever find it again. For Greywater Watch moves. Many would-be conquerors have died trying to find us. With war all around and our stark lord besieged on all sides, many more will doubtless soon try. They will look at us on a map and see a stranglehold for the north. And they will forget that the sea itself once entered the Neck, and not all of it returned.
So that's all the information I think that can be gleaned from Mira's description and the DVD extras. The other source of information we have on my favourite house and the culture in which it exists is from the book The World of Ice and Fire, The Untold History of Westeros and the Game of Thrones. The following audio you hear will be read from that book.
Last, and some might say least, of the peoples of the north are the swamp dwellers of the Neck, known as the cranog men for the floating islands on which they raise their halls and hovels.
So this short section reveals that the cranog men gain their name from a particular structure they like to build called a cranog. But what exactly is a cranog?
Cranogs are a type of ancient loch dwelling found throughout Scotland and Ireland, while one has been discovered in Wales in Llangolls Lake. Most are circular structures that seem to have been built as individual homes to accommodate extended families. Other types of loch settlements are also found in Scandinavian countries and throughout Europe. Cranogs are also known as artificial or modified natural islands, and they were as much a product of their environment as the period in which they were constructed. The earliest loch dwelling in Scotland is some 5,000 years old, but people built, modified, and reused cranogs in Scotland up until the 17th century AD. Throughout their long history, cranogs served as farmers' homesteads, status symbols, refuges in times of trouble, hunting and fishing stations, and even holiday residences. Here in Highland Perthshire, the prehistoric cranogs were originally timber-built roundhouses supported on piles or stilts driven into the ulch bed. In more barren environments and in later periods, tons of rock were piled onto the ulch bed to make an island on which to build a stone house. Today the cranogs appear as tree-covered islands or remain hidden as submerged stony mounds. Several hundred have been discovered so far in Scotland, although only a few have been investigated.
So that's what a cranog is then. Let's get back to the passage from The World of Ice and Fire.
A small, sly people. Some say they are small in stature because they intermarried with the children of the forest, but more likely it results from inadequate nourishment, for grains do not flourish amidst the fens and swamps and salt marshes of the neck, and the cranog men subsist largely on a diet of fish, frogs and lizards.
It seems likely to me, as has been hinted at in various places, that the cranog men and House Reed, as an extension of them, have interbred at some point with the children of the forest. Various parts of their descriptions lend credence to this, and would explain where characters like Jojen Reed have acquired the green sight, which is a traditionally children of the forest trait. Other evidence that exists outside of this more speculative one comes from another passage in The World of Ice and Fire, which is related to the way that the children of the forest also used to talk to animals.
Though considered disreputable in this, our present day, a fragment of Septon Bath's unnatural history has proved a source of controversy in the halls of the citadel, claiming to have consulted with texts said to be preserved at Castle Black. Septon Bath put forth that the children of the forest could speak with ravens, and could make them repeat their words. According to Bath, this higher mystery was taught to the first men by the children, so that ravens could spread messages at a great distance.
It seems likely then that this trait is something natural in the children of the forest, and something that through interbreeding with the cranog men have also developed. It's possible that this green sight and warging are all different facets of the same object, and that perhaps this talking to animals is a kind of garbled and superstitious way of describing the green sight. Certainly the description of the cranog men of having unusually coloured eyes, a trait which is associated with the ability of green sight, is very suggestive of this. So let's get back into the passage from The World of Ice and Fire.
South of the neck, the river folk whose lands are joined to their own say that the cranog men breathe water, have webbed hands and feet like frogs, and use poisons on their frog spears and their arrows. That last, it must be said, is true enough. Many a merchant has brought rare herbs and plants with many queer properties to the citadel, for the maesters seek such things out to better understand their properties and their value. But of the rest there is no truth to it. Cranog men are men, albeit smaller than most, even if they live in a fashion unique in the Seven Kingdoms. Long ago the histories claim the cranog men were ruled by the Marsh Kings. Singers tell of them riding on lion lizards and using great frog spears like lances, but that is clearly fancy. Were the Marsh Kings even truly kings as we understand it? Archmaester Aaron writes that the cranog men saw their kings as the first among equals, who were often thought to be touched by the old gods.
This part of the passage reveals that the cranog men have a different societal structure to the rest of Westeros, and I would suggest that through this limited scrap of information we could probably deduce that it's likely that the culture of the cranog men is based roughly on the ancient Celtic people of Ireland. So perhaps in looking at the way that the ancient people of Ireland structured their society, we might learn a little bit more about the way that House Reed's culture also organises itself.
And this was also a society where not only the courts and the law were largely libertarian, but where they operated within a purely stateless and libertarian society. This was ancient Ireland, an Ireland which persisted in this libertarian path for roughly 1,000 years, until its brutal conquest by England in the 17th century. And in contrast to many similarly functioning primitive tribes, such as the Igbos in West Africa and many European tribes, pre-conquest Ireland was not in any sense a primitive society. It was a highly complex society that was, for centuries, the most advanced, most scholarly, and most civilized in all of Western Europe. For 1,000 years, then, ancient Celtic Ireland had no state, or anything like it. As the leading authority on ancient Irish law has written, there was no legislature, no bailiffs, no police, no public enforcement of justice. There was no trace of state-administered justice. How then was justice secured? The basic political unit of ancient Ireland was the tuath. All freemen who owned land, all professionals and all craftsmen were entitled to become members of a tuath. Each tuath's members formed an annual assembly which decided all common policies, declared war or peace on other tuatha, and elected or deposed their kings. An important point is that in contrast to primitive tribes, no one was stuck or bound to a given tuath, either because of kinship or of geographical location. Individual members were free to, and often did, secede from a tuath and join a competing tuath. Often, two or more tuatha decided to merge into a single, more efficient unit. As Professor Joe Peden states, the tuath is thus a body of persons voluntarily united for socially beneficial purposes, and the sum total of the landed properties of its members constituted its territorial dimension. In short, they did not have the modern state with its claim to sovereignty over a given, usually expanding, territorial area, divorced from the landed property rights of its subjects. On the contrary, tuatha were voluntary associations, which only comprised the landed properties of its voluntary members. Historically, about 80 to 100 tuatha coexisted at any time throughout Ireland. But what of the elected king? Did he constitute a form of state ruler? Chiefly, the king functioned as a religious high priest, presiding over the worship rites of the tuath, which functioned as a voluntary religious as well as a social and political organization. As in pagan, pre-Christian priesthoods, the kingly function was hereditary, this practice carrying over to Christian times. The king was elected by the tuath from within a royal kin group, which carried the hereditary priestly function. Politically, however, the king had strictly limited functions. He was the military leader of the tuath, and he presided over the tuath assemblies. But he could only conduct war or peace negotiations as agent of the assemblies, and he was in no sense sovereign and had no rights of administering justice over tuath members. He could not legislate, and when he himself was party to a lawsuit, he had to submit his case to an independent judicial arbiter.
So that might be a near-perfect description of how the cranog men previously used to handle their affairs in their own culture before they were essentially taken over by the Starks. So let's hear the end of the passage.
Whatever the truth, the last man to be called Marsh King was killed by King Rickard Stark, sometimes called the Laughing Wolf in the North for his good nature, who took the man's daughter to wife, whereupon the cranog men bent their knees and accepted the dominion of Winterfell. In the centuries since, the cranog men have become stout allies of the Starks under the leadership of the Reeds of Greywater Watch.
So this is pretty much all of the information I can find out about House Reed and the cranog men. I hope you found it interesting, and I hope that in some way you might start to see why House Reed is my personal favourite house and why I've chosen it as the name of my channel. Please let me know what your favourite house is and why in the comments below. And if you like this video, why not like it? And if you really like it, why not subscribe?